In this episode, we're going to discuss how will DCTs impact sponsor relationships with CROs? How do small CROs and sponsors adapt to emerging trends? How do new trends impact industry relationships with the FDA? Does DCT allow the FDA to advise sponsors? What is the role of technology in decentralized clinical trials? Do decentralized clinical trials reduce the cost of actually bringing drugs to the market? What are the risks and advantages of DCTs? What are the initial risks of decentralized clinical trials? Does the FDA even have jurisdiction over patient privacy? Our guest is Isaac Rodriguez Chavez, a former FDA officer who is now working as an independent consultant. And I am Darshan Kulkarni, principal attorney at the Kulkarni Law Firm. I focus my attention on FDA-regulated companies and their service providers, including issues involving medical affairs, clinical research, and drug advertising. Let's get into it. What are DCTs going to do to sponsor relationships with CROs and with sites? If you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, share. It really helps the channel.
It's more of a dynamic partnership kind of relationship that requires the technology to conduct these DCTs that are trending to be more complex and global in nature, while maintaining the patient-centric approaches and defining clearly the roles and responsibilities of each of the parties with transparency and close communications. That's where I think we are.
This development of a partnership, the synergistic relationship. The question I have, though, is doesn't that favor larger CROs with larger sponsors instead of smaller sponsors and smaller CROs? Because larger sponsors often have the infrastructure to deal with these newer trends and newer goals. What does that mean for smaller CROs and smaller sponsors?
The market is segmented, that there is room for everybody to exist and to coexist. The large pharmaceutical companies may have the funds and the resources and the preferences for larger CROs that provide the end-to-end type of solutions for them, because there are some practicalities there in terms of managing one team that can offer everything that they are looking for. There is a whole spectrum in the sizes of the pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, clinical research stage, startup companies, and so on. And so they all have different needs. They all have different philosophies. They all essentially are looking for, bottom line, how do I cover the specific needs for this clinical trial or for my pipeline? And how do I do this in a cost-effective manner and in a cost-efficient manner so that I can get what I need without essentially compromising my resources?
You talk about how this is influencing the relationships. How is this going to impact the relationships and the meetings that industry is going to have with the FDA?
From the regulatory standpoint, the entity that the FDA is going to interact with, the legal entity with whom the FDA is going to interact with, is the sponsor. It's not the CRO. The CRO might be present in these interactions if the sponsor allows it, and this is clarified to the agency. But from the regulatory standpoint, from the Code of Federal Regulations, the legal standpoint, the entity that is responsible for the specific medical product is the sponsor of that medical product. The CRO is only another legal entity that is acting on behalf of the sponsor under a legal contract agreement to conduct the clinical investigation primarily.
I need to clarify. What I was referring to is, do DCTs allow for a whole new armamentarium of options for the FDA to advise sponsors in these ABC type of meetings to go, well, you want to achieve XYZ goal. Instead of doing the study this way, would you consider doing a DCT study and that might be another way to get to the goal you're trying to achieve?
It is possible. I see now what you're asking. That is a possibility. But remember, the FDA is a regulatory agency, it's not a consulting agency. So this will be, as a matter of fact, guidance that the FDA will provide to the sponsors after the sponsors come to the agency with the specific proposals under an IND, for example, for drugs and biologics, so that they have a proposed clinical plan for assessing the safety and efficacy of that medical product that they want to commercialize in the United States.
With the advent of personal computing, Bill Gates had said and was right in that software is the big winner and not hardware. What do you see as the role of technology in DCTs?
Prominent, very important. The technology is not the centerpiece. The centerpiece is us, the designers. The technology is the enabler. And so, because the activities that are conducted in decentralized clinical trials, for the most part, are done around the patient, around the participant of the trial, and done remotely. If it's fully done remotely, again, it's a fully decentralized clinical trial. If some of these activities are happening at the clinical research site and others are happening remotely, it's a hybrid DCT. And those are the distinctions that the guidance talks about. But essentially, in either case or in both cases, the technology is the enabler.
Today's news, yesterday's news, is that HHS announced there are 10 medications they announced where there will be price caps, or at least negotiations on pricing that's going to be done. One of the discussions has been, how do we reduce the cost of bringing a drug to the market? Can you speak to how DCTs might reduce cost of bringing a drug to the market?
The principle is, if we optimize all the steps of the DCT, if we utilize technology to streamline processes and procedures, to optimize the steps, to minimize errors, to maintain, to enhance enrollment and retention, and to observe and report adverse events in minimum time, we should be able to progressively decrease costs, decrease times in actually doing what we need to do.
Here's another question that comes out of it. It reminds me of risk-based monitoring. Risk-based monitoring was theoretically supposed to drop the cost of monitoring because you aren't doing as much monitoring, you're monitoring based on risk. What do you see as the risks of DCTs, and what are the advantages or the opportunities that DCTs offer?
That is an important question. I would say, and this is clearly spelled out in the draft guidance for decentralized clinical trials, the regulatory expectations for DCTs are the same as compared to any other clinical investigation. There is not a new rule or a new set of clauses in the Code of Health Regulations that stipulates that DCTs particularly should be doing A, B, or C. The regulatory expectations are the same for all of these.
Could you speak a little bit more expansively about the risks overall with DCTs?
Decentralized clinical trials, as any kind of clinical investigation and approach, is not perfect. And it all depends on how these trials are first designed, how they are strategized, and how they are operationalized. We all have different levels of experience in conducting decentralized clinical trials or not. And that shows also in how we think about the strategy, the protocol design, and the implementation of strategic operations for a DCT.
Is patient privacy, as you see it, an FDA issue, or is it an OCR or a state privacy issue? Because technically speaking, does the FDA even have jurisdiction over the issue of patient privacy?
It's the responsibility of the sponsor
Sure.
in the first place.
Agreed.
And the sponsor has to show the different entities that you said how they're going to maintain patient privacy. And the different entities that you just mentioned will provide feedback as to the adequacy or not of the plan put in place to protect the participants' privacy.
Quick question for you. How can people reach you to consult?
I am in LinkedIn. People can send me an email at Isaac, ISAACRODC @gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Isaac.
Thank you.
Need help with your clinical trial compliance program? Email me at darshan@kulkarnilaw.com.